Hello, this is your Mayor, Ken Cyber, City of Southfield, and we're about to begin a great series on Southfield art, architecture, and historic places. So today, I am standing in the kitchen of the Mary Thompson farmhouse. And this house is one of our historic shrines in Southfield. It dates back to 1842, had been added on to over the years. So what we see on Evergreen Road today wasn't exactly how it looked back in 1842. The house housed the family, the Thompson and Stewart family, who were early pioneers in Southfield. And in those days, the family all lived together because you're working on a farm and every hand is important. It's about survival. It's about tending to the animals. It's about tending to the crops and making sure that you grow and produce enough that you can have subsistence with the other things that you need. So for instance, this house was illuminated with kerosene lamps or candles. Those weren't necessarily made on the farm, and there were things that they had to buy, including cloth to make their clothing and so on and so forth. And obviously farm implements and what have you. So how this house came into the city's possession is that Mary Thompson, who was born in 1871 and lived here until her death in 1967 at the age of 96, left the property to the city. But before that, I need to back up and talk about Southfield in the post-war years. The first developers came to Southfield really in the 1920s. It was Southfield Township then. Louise Lathrop carved out her community, Lathrop Village. Guy Green owned much of the area between Southfield, on either side of Southfield Road, all the way over to Greenfield, and he was building the Magnolia subdivision. And then another developer named Lee Baker. We have Lee Baker Street in Southfield. Lee Baker was developing Washington Heights. And then, of course, we hit the Depression, the Great Depression. Very little housing was being built during those years. And then the country was engaged in World War II. So post-World War II, there is a pent-up demand for housing. GIs are coming home from the war, they're starting families, and so we see this great development rush in Metro Detroit. And in the post-war years, more and more people are buying automobiles. The automobile industry had a growth spurt in the 20s, and then again after World War II. And so with the expansion of the automobile and the housing demand, developers were looking for open spaces in Metro Detroit in order to expand. And so Southfield was primed for that because Woodward Avenue was a major artery, so was Van Dyke, Michigan Avenue. Southfield didn't really have that, and it didn't have a railroad. The Grand Trunk Railroad ran up through Royal Oak and to Pontiac. So Southfield was in the immediate post-war years. Southfield was pretty much wide open fields and farms, and so with a few small housing clusters. So developers started buying up Southfield and building subdivisions, and land went for was going for as high as $25,000 an acre. Mary Thompson, she was a woman of the earth. And so she was not about, she rebuffed people that wanted to buy her farm. She grew corn out here. She had a flock of sheep. She was very comfortable in this house. This is the house that her family had lived in for so many years. But I want to stop there and talk a little more about Mary Thompson. So Mary Thompson is an extraordinary woman. And think of this, she grows up in rural Southfield Township. This is the sticks at the time. It's virtually all farmland in the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and so on. And yet Mary is well-read. She's an intelligent woman and extraordinary in the sense that she goes to Birmingham. It was Baldwin High School. Had to drop out for a while because her mother was ill, but gets her high school diploma. Then she goes to what's now Eastern Michigan University, but it was then Eastern Michigan Normal School. And, but that's not the end. She goes to Columbia University in New York City. She gets a master's degree, and she gets a doctorate. Again, a Southfield farm girl earns a doctorate, and she gets that from New York University. And then she she's left the farm. She has teaching and curriculum development in various places, including Jacksonville, Florida. But the Depression hits, and her brother James is in danger of losing the farm. And so Mary comes back, and she becomes a Southfield teacher. And on Southfield Road, there was a wooden schoolhouse, one-room schoolhouse, that was district number 7. In those days, there wasn't a Southfield public schools. There were small little school districts because they were carved out within walking distance for farm children. And so Mary could walk back through her fields and get over to Southfield Road and taught at district number 7 school. Then Lee Baker goes to the District 7 and says, I'm going to build you a brand new schoolhouse because I'm going to build a lot of houses in Southfield in my Washington Heights development. And to bring people out from the city, we need a good school. And Louise Lathrop did the same thing, and so did Guy Green and Magnolia. They built schools. Unheard of today, where a housing developer would build a school. Nonetheless, so Mary becomes the principal of McKinley School on George Washington Avenue, which is still standing today. She was the first principal of that school. So anyhow, she's an extraordinary woman. And back to the post-war boom, she's here, her neighbors are selling their property. She steadfastly refuses to sell. In the meantime, more and more people are moving to Southfield because new homes are being built. And roads are being expanded, and more people can drive out of the city to far off places. So we get to a point in the late 50s where Southfield now has a significant population. It's a changing community. We've lost pieces of Southfield because they've been chipped off as Franklin Village, Bingham Farms, Beverly Hills, Lathrop Village. So Southfield Township is being carved up. And in 1958, we incorporate as the city of Southfield. And so the old town hall on Berg Road isn't gonna serve a new city, and so we need a civic center. We're expanding. We have more services that we have to provide, including police and fire and the water department, water and sewer, and all the things that cities have to do. And so Mary is approached about selling her property for a civic center. And by this point, she's well up in age. She is in late 80s, and her brother is in fragile health. And so she agrees in 1959 to sell 106 acres to the new city of Southfield. But the problem was, the city of Southfield didn't have the money to outright pay her for her property. But, as I said earlier, property in Southfield with developers were buying up farms, and they were paying as much as $25,000. Mary, with her civic mindedness and love of Southfield, agreed to sell her first 106 acres of her farm to the city of Southfield for $4,500, greatly reduced price. And she did it on a land contract. So the new city of Southfield was making payments to her and while she lived in this house. So she sold 106 acres and then saved her farm and her barn and her outbuildings and continued to raise her sheep. The city develops a plan in the early 60s for the civic center that we know today. And of course that civic center opened in 1967. And then Mary passed away in 1967.